Favianna Rodriguez began forging her own path at a very young age.
I started walking out my high school at age 15.
Wow.
Organizing against California's Proposition 187, which was an anti-immigrant initiative. And I realized the power of art at a very young age. And I was doing all these political graphics, but that's not what's going to get you into art school. It wasn't then. I mean, today I'm not sure that has changed. But I ended up dropping out of college, even though I had full scholarships, and I built my own path. And after I dropped out of school in 1999, about 10 years later, I got an honorary PhD. And so I was able to bring home that degree to my parents.
Full circle. Favianna Rodriguez is an interdisciplinary artist, cultural strategist, and entrepreneur based in Oakland, California. Her work addresses migration, gender justice, climate change, racial equity, among other topics.
In 2011, she co-founded the Center for Cultural Power, a women of color artist-led organization that works at the intersection of arts, culture, and social justice. The center works to build a world where art and culture reflect the full diversity of society and where cultural power is democratized to advance justice and liberation for all communities. The daughter of Peruvian immigrants to the United States, Favianna is a force to be reckoned with. Welcome to PathBreakers, a show about the people who break through the noise, the red tape, and all the other obstacles that can stand in the way of progress. My name is Jamie Bennett. I work in arts, culture, and equitable community development. And this is a very special episode for me because I've been in conversation with Favianna since she and I were at South by Southwest together in 2019.
And I'm Tracy Pearson. I work at the Kresge Foundation, and I've come to understand that Favianna's work in and outside of the Center for Cultural Power serves as a guide for anyone interested in combining their passion with social change. The first thing we wanted to hear from Favianna was her artist origin story.
So I was growing up in East Oakland during the era of the war on drugs. Crack was being brought into our communities. Crack devastated Oakland.
Oakland is in the midst of a violent battle over control of the drug trade. Police say that drugs have been responsible for 41 murders already this year.
And I could not go outside. I couldn't go outside because of the gangs, because of what was happening in our community. And so I would look out my window and literally see people getting jumped into gangs. And my safe place was my art. And because I could not go outside and I had to, be inside so much, my mom and my dad let me have all the art supplies I could have so I could entertain myself. And they met this chola that used to live in my neighborhood. And the cholas, they were the gangster girls. And this chola knew how to draw lowriders and like leopards and like the smile now, cry later things. And my mom hired her to teach me how to draw.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. And I learned from my community and I started learning how to draw. And then there would be free mural classes taught by the Chicana muralists in my neighborhood. And I was the only young person in that class. And so I learned how to paint and how to draw. And when I was in high school, because I would draw pretty things and I would organize, but I still hadn't linked the fact that art could be a tool for activism. And one day when I was in high school, I was involved in youth organizing, and one of my mentors handed me a drawing by an artist named Yolanda Lopez, right? This was the era when the governor, Pete Wilson, the governor of California, was raging on and on about how immigrants were coming to steal jobs and these illegals, he would use the word illegal, were invading.
I'm suing to force the federal government to control the border, and I'm working to deny state services to illegal immigrants. Enough is enough.
Governor Pete Wilson.
And here was this drawing by Yolanda Lopez that had an Aztec man wrinkling papers. And the poster said, "Who's the illegal alien, pilgrim?" And when I saw that, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe that there could exist something that called out white supremacy and that called out these white folks for trying to call us illegals when, my family's from Peru, we're not from Mexico, but I always knew that this had been Mexican land. And that's when I was like, that is the kind of art that I want to do. I want to do art that's going to make people feel empowered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I once heard you say that culture precedes politics. And it was something that was really profound for me because I think, like many people, the correlation between art and politics isn't always crystal clear. So even going back to your founding of the Cultural Power Center, what is the relationship there?
The relationship is that culture surrounds us all the time. Culture shapes our imaginations and shows us what's possible. It shapes how we relate to each other as human beings and to the natural world. And so when we grow up in a culture, for example, that says that I have to wear skirts and play with princesses and My Little Ponies, and people enforce that in the economic sector, in the political sector, and in the cultural sector, and I watch TV and only see straight people, that culture then translates into the laws that hold our society together, right? And so the story, for example, when we began to see queer characters on TV, when we began to see Ellen or Will and Grace or shows like Pose, then it becomes normal for me to see queer and trans people in their humanity because it's presented to me. When I was a kid, there was no Dora the Explorer. There was no Latinos on TV, except for, Speedy Gonzalez was not a Latino. It was a caricature of a Mexican. Selena was not yet on the radio waves. And people hardly even knew about Frida Kahlo. So even though I was a creative kid, my teachers would say, check out Picasso and Rembrandt and Matisse. And these are who you should strive to be like. If you want to be an artist, here are some artists. And so the culture itself didn't reflect me or my lived experience as a Latina or immigrants for that matter. There was hardly any Black people on TV. Certainly no Asians, except for maybe the Asian characters in 16 Candles, right, who were racist. And so that is what culture is that there are stories in our visual landscape, in the songs we hear. Like imagine if we were listening to songs about consent or about how to have healthy relationships. So all of those stories that are in our culture then shape what we think is possible. And so when we see laws that are being passed against trans people, for example, really as a reaction to the fact that culture has changed so much, you then see that culture moves faster than policy. And that culture precedes policy.
And Favianna, I think we wanted to just ask a little bit, you, in addition to sort of all the art you've done, you've picked up some business and entrepreneurial skills along the way. And the Center for Cultural Power was the 10th, the 15th thing?
My fifth.
Your fifth. I couldn't remember how many it was.
It was my fifth startup.
What were the first four?
Well, the first one was a website design firm that I started when I dropped out of school. I taught myself how to code and I opened a firm where I was building websites and coding, right? It was the .com boom in the Bay Area. My second one was the East Side Arts Alliance, which was a cultural center in the heart of East Oakland. We did not have a cultural center for 100 blocks from the lake to 100th, and working together with folks like Amiri Baraka, Sonia Sanchez, Bobby Seale of the Panthers, Emory Douglas, to create a cultural center that was rooted in arts activism and racial justice. And we ended up buying our building, having 16 units of affordable housing, and having a very vibrant cultural center, which continues today.
That's called?
The East Side Arts Alliance.
East Side
Arts Alliance, yeah.
Shout out to them.
Hey! That's how I feel very rooted to the Black arts and the Chicano arts movement that is the shoulders that I stand on. Then opening my studio, launching Presente.org, which was a sort of a sister of Color of Change, which was a national online organizing platform for Latinos. And then finally, the Center for Cultural Power, which I think was something that really exceeded my wildest dreams. And I'll share with you why I created it, because I really, in the movement work that I was doing locally first, but then nationally, I was just like, where is the political home for artists where we are valued and cared for and supported, and not just, making the signs for the marches and not just attending the galas, but also working on our novels, on our films, on our crazy ideas. I always felt that as an artist, yes, I can totally get down with movements. That's a core part of what I do. So I believe that artists need to be supported not just around action, but around their big ideas, so that we can get a Black Panther, right? And not just the Fruitvale Station, but also a Black Panther, right? We need all of the emotions, all of the spectrum of everything that we can feel as human beings. Artists can help bring that out. And I wanted a space that really, really supported artists along that spectrum, and that would help artists like myself, which is that, the cultural sector is a very hard sector to navigate. When you are a young person and you say, I want to do art for the good of society, I want to do art to change the world. It's actually going to be practically impossible for you to get a job, because the people who are going to hire you are Netflix or Walt Disney or maybe a little design firm. Everything's going to be about profit. So we don't have an ecosystem to bring artists into movement. It's actually, we have somewhat of the seeds of it. We have a small infrastructure nationally, but it's nowhere where it needs to be. And that was what I wanted to create, is actually to think about how do we support the next generation, the thousands of Nina Simones and James Baldwins and Selenas, right? How do we train them, support them, build their confidence so that when they go get that record deal, they also know how to navigate these spaces which are extractive and are going to just take from them. And I feel like, I never would have thought that we would have grown to be a $10 million organization.
Well, and Favianna, just an interesting thing is you've spent some interesting time collaborating with corporations. You've done projects with Old Navy, Spotify, Ben & Jerry's, Playboy. So how did you find a space in corporate collaboration that made sense for you?
Because I believe that the artist, to survive today and to work, needs to be working in all sectors: government, business, reaching folks in mass. And the way that I was able to collaborate with them is through the projects that were values aligned. With Old Navy, I did a shirt for Latino Heritage Month. With Playboy magazine, I did one of my sex positivity art pieces in collaboration with a big pivot in their brand, where they were moving away from toxic masculinity Playboy towards sex positive Playboy under a new editor. And as an artist, I was able to bring my values to the table and to say, this is what I represent. This is the work that I do. And so let's collaborate in a way that's mutually beneficial. And that's what I love to train artists on, is that we can both work with, the big studios and do the grassroots project, because the reality is neither the big studio nor the grassroots project is going to give you a full-time job. It's just not happening right now. We're seeing it even in the entertainment sector. Folks don't get paid enough even to afford health insurance. So artists, musicians, actors, writers are a unorganized workforce, in a way, members of the gig economy, right? And yet we're so powerful.
Well, we created the gig economy, right? I mean, we call it the gig economy for jazz musicians. Artists created the gig economy.
That's right.
Sort of thing. But you've created, you're a job creator. The Center for Cultural Power employs how many people?
In our height, we've employed 50 people.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And actually, that's one thing that I feel very proud of, is that my mom, when she immigrated here, she went through significant hardship. Actually, when her first child was born, she was forced to give him up into adoption. And she lived with a lot of pain in her heart. And the way that she was able to empower herself was by becoming an entrepreneur, by really building something that, recognized her dignity and let her be the boss lady that she was always meant to be. And she, grew a huge network of offices that helped immigrant communities. She still does it to this day. And I learned how to be an entrepreneur by counting her dollar bills. She would be like, count my stacks of money.
Period.
And period. And I only had one job in my life, actually, like working for someone else. I worked at a sandwich shop, and I lost that job because my mom needed me to go help her at her office. And so I got fired. And so I learned at a young age that building your own business meant creating your own ecosystem where your values could really shine through. And so I love building institutions because, one thing is I am going to build something where I hire people who are aligned with me, the folks that are, experiencing the inequality that I experience, right? I remember being sometimes the only woman in certain spaces. And I was like, I'm going to hire these badass women of color because these women of color are killing it.
Yeah.
Killing it, right? Bringing this level of expertise because I felt it in myself and I saw it in the people I work with. And so I was able to build an institution that I think hired the best and the brightest. And to me, the best and the brightest means you have a very diverse workforce. And it also means that you are able to create values-aligned institutions, which means you pay for people's health care. You give maternity leave. You give bereavement leave. You give people 401ks, right? You counter the extractivist economy. We're not Amazon. We don't have the billions that Amazon does. Amazon is extractive. But we can build regenerative businesses that are values aligned. And that's been something that I've adhered to and that I always teach artists to do, is that if you really want to make an impact, it's not just about you. Mm-hmm. It's about thinking about how you can build an ecosystem that can support others, because that's actually how you build power, is you create financial power.
Mm-hmm. When you think about legacy, I think what you said about your mother is a beautiful legacy, and she's inspired you to be this wonderful entrepreneur, and look at all the things that you've created. But when you think about your own legacy, what sort of comes to mind when you want to think about how you want folks to remember the work that you've built?
The first thing that comes to mind is the generational healing and the opportunities that exist because of the people who've organized around me. My mother did not have the option to have an abortion in 1970. Her only option was to carry to term and then for her baby to be adopted by a white family. I had the option to have an abortion, so I did not have to do that. My mother also didn't have the opportunity necessarily to be like fully expressed in her power because she grew up in a culture that punished her for that. And I am fully expressed in my power. It's why I talk about sexuality and embodiment, and why I talk about, even though I saw what the war on drugs did to me, I talk about psychedelic medicine, and I talk about the fact that it can't just be white people healing from psychedelic medicine, right? How do we take those medicines back? Because they're from our communities. They're from our ancestral practices. And so I would say my legacy is around also knowing that my economic output does not define my human value. I witnessed both of my parents work a lot and be defined by the notion that work is everything. And I have learned how to value rest. I'm moving into a more balance and equilibrium. I talk about joy and sexual healing and womb healing and all the things that I didn't have access to. And so I would say that my legacy is learning from the Panthers and from my immigrant parents and taking it to another level of full freedom in our minds, in our bodies, and also calling out and leaving behind the narratives that don't serve us anymore. Like working hard, working extremely hard, being just about our careers and not about our relationships, delaying our joy, right? Especially for women of color too, is this notion of sacrifice and duty, which actually doesn't really serve us. It's extractive. And then finally, I would say is really connecting with the earth. That, when I was growing up and I would think about environmentalism, it wasn't something that appealed to me. But then I was like, oh, actually, it's us who are suffering the most. And through colonization, not only have our ancestors been forced to abuse the land, but like the land, we have been exploited. And so how do we heal that relationship to nature and become environmentalists and demand climate justice? Because the air and the water is, these are basics, the things that will define our health. And that is one thing that we cannot let the oppressor take from us is our health. And so, yeah, I would say that is all of those things are in my legacy: intersectionality, bodily autonomy, and joy.
I often say rest is my resistance. And so I love that you bring up joy and rest and not succumbing to work and hustle culture.
No, but I was just going to say, Favianna, one of the other things that I would have named in your legacy is this notion of cultural power.
Yes.
And when Tracy and I were getting ready for this, she asked some questions that I sort of felt like I should know the answer to, and I didn't quite. And, how is art and activism different than propaganda? What is cultural power? How that's different than political power? How did you land on that P word? Why is power the sort of way that you landed that center? And what does making it cultural power do?
So, yes, my contribution has been cultural power. And it's power because we have been taught to think that culture is soft, when in reality, what we create in our imagination is very, very powerful. Literally, your body, when it believes something and it feels something, it is ready to move in that direction. It doesn't have to be real. The realm of fantasy and possibility in our minds. This is why Steve Biko said, right? Steve Biko from the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa said, the most powerful tool for the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Our minds are very powerful. What we think. If we are thinking that we are less than, if we are thinking that we are always victims, we're not going to be able to live full-fledged lives. But if we are powerful, if we think of ourselves as being able to achieve anything despite the narratives that exist around us to harm us, that is power. That's going to help us advance. And, art activism has also been a word that I've used in the past. But for me, it's actually culture, because culture is beliefs, values, ideas that we share as a society. And I believe that we can change those. And in my lifetime, I have seen those change. Me too. That's a shift. Occupy, the fact that we have the language of the 99%. The fact that we can say today, climate crisis was caused because of colonialism. The fact that we have even words like white supremacy, right? Critical race theory. When I was growing up, we had the word minority, right? So our language has evolved. The fact that we use pronouns. So culture is the big umbrella for all of those things. And so culture is power. And then on your last point on propaganda, this is so interesting because I have this conversation a lot with folks.
Yep.
And especially the artists who sometimes are hesitant to make work that they would deem overtly political. Mm-hmm. First of all, every single cultural thing we interact with is political. It is coming from the perspective and point of view of the creator. And when those creators are overwhelmingly white guys, we are literally seeing the world through their lens.
Yeah.
So all art is political. All art is reflecting a point of view. When you are not doing art from those who have been centered for hundreds and hundreds of years, your art is called women's art, Black art, propaganda art. In reality, we as human beings have been expressing our lived experience since the beginning of time. We've been sitting around a fire, drawing cave drawings, singing songs. It is how we do humanity. So I when people say propaganda, of course there is work that's explicitly political. That doesn't mean it's not good work. And I would say the best art is the art that makes us feel. And I think that the word propaganda is used to separate and to devalue art that is actually very direct and is using ways to be direct. But the propaganda is also what we can call the White House press briefings, right? Propaganda.
So culture is power.
Yeah.
There is power in art. I think the way that you have provided us this beautiful clarity around those things, I just so appreciate that, Favianna.
Thank you.
Now, Favianna, you've started a new path yourself. You've recently left the Center for Cultural Power. Happily, this is not a scandal. There's nothing bad about this. But what is the path that you're on today? Where are you wandering? Where are you heading?
As an artist, which is always my first love, I honestly never would have believed that the Center for Cultural Power would have had the impact that it had.
How old is it?
It's 14 years old.
It's amazing.
I just would have, and not just that, I mean, we have helped define the field. We have given now grants in sizes that had not been heard of in our sector, in the sector of cultural strategy. You know, we have supported just thousands of artists. And I realized one day I was like, in 2022, after I came back from my sabbatical, I realized I said, oh, I have created my masterpiece, which is the Center for Cultural Power. And now it's time for me to go back to another way of creating, because this has been my baby. And, you know, it's interesting when I talk about abortion, I talk about also that there are so many other things that we can birth. And I feel like I birthed the Center for Cultural Power. And as I've been working with people in entertainment, especially, right? And, you know, this past month, we saw Ryan Coogler come out with the film Sinners. Ryan Coogler, who is somebody that from Oakland, who I look up to so much when I think about what an artist activist can do, what somebody who knows that culture is power can do over and over again. Talk about building your own institution. Talk about working with the people you love. Talk about breaking paths, right?
Yeah.
And I was so inspired by the moving image, by film and television, from the day that I met the women in Hollywood from Me Too. And when I was able to meet people like Ava DuVernay and Shonda Rhimes, and also see how abusive the entertainment industry is, I was like, this is where I want to work next. Because it, you know, you had Me Too, and then you had the writer strikes.
Right.
Right. That industry has really, really shown us what happens when big corporations and white men, take over a storytelling infrastructure that shapes the entire planet.
Right.
When you look at the stories emerging from Hollywood, less than 3% of those stories even talk about climate. Very few talk about abortion. We have all of the DEI wins that we had in 2020 are gone, right? The same thing that's happening politically is happening in entertainment. And so I want to move into that space. One, because what I've learned, and, you know, this is also thanks to amazing organizations like Sundance, right? Who year after year really show what happens when you support artists at the ground level, and how Ryan Coogler came out of Sundance, right? And when I see that Freaky Tales, a film about Oakland, just coming out of Sundance, just like, you know, stories about Native folks, about Latino folks. And when I look at Sundance, I'm like, oh, wow, this is a ecosystem that I want to participate in next. And so I'm working on a short film and an episodic, a TV show about my abortion and the story, my abortions, and how that opened the door for me for generational womb healing. I want to do stories about where climate change is a setting or part of the plot. And I want to just be in alignment with a community of artists that has been very abused. I want to organize there.
It makes me think about a question of, okay, we see these issues and these systems being dismantled. From the place where I sit, how can a foundation and philanthropy step in so that we're not extractive, but we're actually helping?
Yeah. Well, I have been very proud of how foundations like Kresge have from the get really recognized that art is a tremendous economic lever, right? It's a lever of empowerment. It's a lever to to build places. And it's a way for artists to have real economic opportunity. It's not just a nice to have, it's a necessity. I mean, that's been something that Kresge's been talking about for years. And for years, Kresge has been a partner of ours. But yeah, I believe that the role of foundations, especially now, and in 2016, I did notice that the Philanthropic Center began to wake up to the power of culture and narrative. And now, I mean, so many organizing sectors, whether you're doing LGBTQ organizing or economic organizing, are seeing that they need to invest in narrative and culture because our opposition has been deeply investing in narrative. I mean, you all may have seen that Media Matters report that said that online shows are dominated by right-wing extremists hosts and ideologies, and not just by a little bit, by a lot. And that's because the right-wing extremists have recognized a while ago that culture is a winning strategy. It's a lever that they're going to pull on. And they went in big, right? They've gone in big, multi-year investments. When they find someone who's talented, they support that person across media, across books, podcasts. And so there's a lot of lessons also for those of us who want a just and dignified world where everyone can thrive. And that is to invest more deeply in culture and to invest in artists, because I think there are artists out there, of course, Ryan Coogler being one of them, folks like Kamau Bell, America Ferrera, like folks who have just proven that across mediums, they are able to do very powerful work.
I love that. Tracy, what questions are you left with? What comment are you left with? Where do we want to land the plane?
What advice do you have for emerging artists or activists who want to boldly carve new paths for social change?
Yes. The advice I have for emerging artists is that you are experiencing one of the most hard and yet creative moments in our history. Any issue that you care about, climate, food justice, national parks, abortion access, immigrant rights, there is something for you to say about it. And there is an organization out there who not only needs your work, but work that you can create will be in a protest within a week, right? We are living through times where the things we create, people want them because they want to go show up, right? They want to speak out against the cuts to our public land. They want to speak out against how service workers are being fired. They want to speak out about the corporations who are supporting extremism. They want to be in alliance. They want to protect their neighbors. And so it becomes a moment to be highly creative, and that your art actually can be elevated and used by those who want to change the narrative. And these kinds of moments are rare in our history. Thank goodness that we're going through a nightmarish era. And this is exactly when artists get to work. And so get to work, connect with an organization, connect with the folks who are organizing, and make stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, literally, it can be words. It can be symbols. There is so much room for your ideas right now.
Yeah.
And in creating, you're going to learn how to work with movements. You're going to learn how people are going to resonate with certain things you do, and they're not going to resonate with others. It's going to be a tremendously educational moment for you, and it's going to be transformative, because the folks that really love your stuff and are going to resonate with your stuff are going to hold it up. So get to work. Don't be shy. It's okay to make mistakes, but it's time to use your tools towards the good of the planet.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Favianna.
Thank you.
Favianna, Tracy and I still don't have a cute way to end these podcasts.
Nope.
If you had to have like 5 closing words that would be like a good sign-off tagline for the PathBreakers podcast, what should our closing line be?
We are building new worlds.
Favianna Rodriguez is the co-founder of the Center for Cultural Power in Oakland, California. We put a link to the center in our show notes, as well as a link to see some of Favianna's absolutely beautiful artwork.
PathBreakers is produced by the Kresge Foundation. Founded in 1924 with a mission to promote human progress, today Kresge works to expand equity and opportunity in America's cities. Read all the stories of this season's PathBreakers and learn more about Kresge's grant-making and its social investing work in Detroit, Memphis, New Orleans, Fresno, and cities all across the U.S. at kresge.org. If you want to hear more conversations like this, please be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Our producers are Juliette Heinley, Zach Rosen, and our managing editor is Krista Yankee. Show art is provided by Rochelle Baker and creative direction by Alejandro Herrera. Thank you to my colleagues on the Arts and Culture program for lifting up Favianna and speaking her name as a truly remarkable pathbreaker. See you all next week.